Hello and welcome to Coffee with Carey. I'm Carey. I wanted to thank you for stopping by today. If you are new here, we have a channel that I have created in hopes of bringing together women in their 50s to discuss things that are interesting to me, things like beauty, fashion, food, and because I am a matchmaker and dating coach in the Chicago area, a lot of times I like to share some of the date coaching that I do with my clients here. And that is my intention today, to share with you some of the advice that I give to my clients. And it has to do, well, let me backtrack a little bit. If you have had the opportunity to go on a job interview recently, you will probably notice that they don't ask you the same typical questions that they used to, which was tell me about yourself, why do you want this job? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Instead, there seems to be a trend towards asking you to tell a story. And some of those stories might be, I actually pulled up a couple here for you. Tell me about a time when you failed. Tell me about a time when you dealt with a difficult customer and how you handled that. Tell me about a time when you missed an important deadline. Or tell me a story about when you learned from a mistake and how that impacted you moving forward. And I noticed this was going on, and I realized that if they're asking for that in job interviews, and very often any negative feedback I get from dates after a date takes place, and I do send out a feedback form after the date and hear both people tell me what they thought of the conversation and meeting one another. And if the date didn't go as well as planned, very often the negative feedback is that it felt like an interview. And I thought, if they are asking for stories in real interviews, why are my clients and the people I match them with not doing that on dates? And that is what I have been recommending to clients and their matches for the last year or so. And here's how that would work. I challenge you to sit down and write out the 15 questions that you would want to ask someone if you were on a date, with a little notepad and a checklist and going, where's your family? What's your religion? Where do you work? Blah, blah. So when you see this list of 15 questions, split them up into categories. Maybe these first 5 are about family, the second 5 are about career, and the third 5 are about lifestyle or something that's interesting to you, hobbies, things of that nature. And when you look at these 3 different categories, figure out what type of a story you could ask for that the story would likely encompass the answer to those questions that you started with. So for example, you could ask, where does your family live? Do you still go to, do you still follow a religion? Do you go to religious services? What's your nationality? How's your health? Do you get along with children? Or you could say to a gentleman, tell me a story about how you celebrated the holiday this past December. And he would say something like, oh, well, I went down to my sister's in Atlanta, and she's got 4 kids and a big yard, and my parents came up from Orlando and we went to midnight mass, which was just amazing because I hadn't been to mass in about 4 years and I really missed it. I should really go more. And the next day was great. We got up early, and I'm an early morning person, so that was fine for me, but we were playing touch football out in the front yard with the kids, and I only made it about 20 minutes because my knee was acting up. I had a knee replacement a couple months ago, still recuperating from that a little bit. I should be good as new, but my old soccer injury came back to haunt me. So I went in the house hanging out with my mom, and she was trying to get me to help her out in the kitchen. She's very concerned about passing on all these old Italian recipes. So in this example, you can see how much more you would learn about this fella from him sharing a story about his holiday this past December, and it would be a lot more fun for him than had you asked him all these questions on your checklist. So that is half of the equation, asking for stories that would give you a lot of insight as to who this person is. Could be about the way they travel, right? or how they choose to usually spend their Sunday afternoons. But instead of asking those specific one-off questions, ask for a story. Try it. I would love to hear how it goes for you. My clients are loving this advice. And in fact, I gave it to one of my male clients out in the Southwest. And he said that he's been using this in business a lot more with clients, actually, not hiring, but with clients, in order to help them, give him some insight as to how he can help them. So asking for stories is a great tool. And now on the flip side of this, I want to talk about your stories a little bit. If I were to invite you and your best friend over to my house for coffee with Carey, at some point you would likely start telling a story and your friend would say, "Oh my gosh, not this story again." And I want that story. I want you to harness all of those stories that you tell over and over again. Because the way I see it, those stories say something about you. They are either, your sense of humor, or they tell something about you that you want people to know, or you just enjoy telling the stories, or they really show your sense of humor. So when you find yourself telling one of those stories, I encourage you to grab your cell phone and start a note, "My Stories," and jot it down so that you can periodically take a peek at these stories and kind of have them at your disposal so that you can pull one out at the drop of a hat and share a story about yourself on a date that would also encourage someone to share a story about themselves. And I mentioned the second part of it in another video that was about saving a bad date. And that had to do with throwing this line in front of the story, which I will recap here. The segue into you just using a story of yours randomly is something you just said reminded me about this time, that I was in Mexico with my niece, and the tide came in and everything we owned was taken out to sea. Whatever your story is. When I make up these crazy ones on the spur of the moment, I crack myself up. So harness your own stories. Figure out what stories you want to ask another person as you're getting to know them. And I think your date will end up with much better feedback than if they walked away thinking you were checking a list under the table and putting check marks next to your yeses and nos on this date. You don't want it to feel like a business meeting or an interview. And on that front, actually, when you're sitting at a table on a date, try to sit next to each other this way so that the other person would be sitting here looking at me. Much more intimate than if they were directly across from me like you are, which can tend to feel a little bit like an interview. So that's the bonus tip for you there. I hope you found that helpful. If you did, please subscribe to my channel and then hit that ring bell button so that you're notified whenever I upload new videos. And as always, I truly, truly appreciate you taking the time to stop by and see what I wanted to talk about today. I hope you'll come back again. Thank you very, very much. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time.